I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Once upon a time, 70 years ago, a little less, the United States of America was the nuclear power on the planet. At the Potsdam Conference outside of Berlin in summer of 1945, Truman, the sudden new president, a man who had not known in detail of the Manhattan Project until he was told after Franklin Delano Roosevelt's death, this man approached Joseph Stalin days after the Trinity test in America to tell Stalin that there was a secret new weapon and that it would be used against the Japanese to end the war in Japan quickly. Truman's ambition was to bring Russia into the war against Japan, not to frighten Stalin. However, Stalin, a naturally paranoid man after years of mass murder, believed that as long as the U.S. was the only nuclear power, Russia was helpless, that its borders, its army, its strength that had just defeated the Hitlerites would not work. Therefore, Stalin committed himself and committed the Soviet state to stealing the secrets to build the bombs that we now know as routine part of the world, the nuclear powers. At the same time, the United States shared the bomb with Great Britain, who, after all, because of the technology, had shared the development with the United States. It could have been Churchill's bomb. We had the money and we had the manpower and we had the place to build, to create fissile material. All this is not an ancient story. It's 70 years minus a few, and here we are in the 21st century. The nuclear club, those who have the bomb today, is 9 or 10 states, depending upon the doubts. And suddenly, it has a new category called a threshold nuclear power. That is Iran. That's the results of the Vienna deal that the president and the vice president announced most recently as a success. Claudia Rosett of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, writing most recently at Forbes, is looking at the story of the nuclear club and asking this question, and I will ask it of Claudia. Claudia, a very good evening to you. The nuclear umbrella that the United States has provided to its allies, the amount of weaponry that can counter any threat of a nuclear weapon against us or our allies, has that umbrella collapsed? Have we withdrawn it? Is it gone? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. Right now, there is no U.S. nuclear umbrella. We still have nuclear weapons, although fewer than we did some time ago. But what use is it to have those if nobody believes that you will use them? And one thing that the Iran nuclear deal has just underscored is that nobody believes that we will use them, and our president has made it very clear we will not. There is no more credible threat there. And that leaves us wide open to what we have just seen in the way of nuclear extortion from an Iran that has not even so far tested a bomb.
Iran now is a threshold nuclear state. That means that, and depending upon how you interpret John Kerry's remarks, in 5 or 8 or 10 years or 15 years, Iran will, in the open, develop nuclear weapons. However, we can follow the logic that it won't wait that long. It perhaps hasn't now. And in the meantime, Iran is empowered to continue its predator relationship with its neighbors. It is starting civil wars, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, the Horn of Africa, and it's threatening Israel routinely. Is that all part of the nuclear deal? Help the public, help me understand, Claudia. How does making Iran a nuclear threshold state help the rest of the region solve this threat?
John, it helps nothing. It makes it all far more dangerous. What we've just seen is really quite incredible. At these nuclear talks, which went on for 20 months after the initial interim deal was struck, we saw 5 major nuclear powers, the P5, the permanent 5 of the UN Security Council, plus Germany. Those nuclear powers being the U.S., Russia, China, the U.K., France, who went to the table with Iran and overran, in the end, 6 deadlines. It stretched on not for 6 months as initially envisioned, but for 20. And they emerged having given one concession after another. In other words, you had 5 major powers, 5 nuclear-armed powers led by the United States, which made enormous concessions in their desperation, the U.S. desperation principally, to cut a deal with Iran. Well, when you set that precedent, you have sent a message to the world that it's open season for the kind of nuclear extortion that North Korea has used very well to sustain its regime and actually build nuclear bombs. And now we have Iran following in that path. And what is the U.S. doing? Actually, John, on Monday morning, the UN Security Council sat down and, like obedient ducks, lined up and all praised this as a triumph of diplomacy.
There's a sense now, Claudia, that you don't actually need a nuclear weapon to get what you want and be secure. You can simply negotiate to be a nuclear threshold power and launch aggressive war against the neighbors, continue to be the exporter of terrorism on the planet, and no one will punish you. Is that the lesson now? You don't need a nuke weapon. You just have to talk about one.
Well, you have to credibly be making one or look like you might have one. What matters here, John, is you have to be believably willing to use it and looking for it, but willing to use it. You have to be somebody or a country where people believe you, that when you say you have aggressive intentions or might attack or might do something even in your defense. It's got to be credible. The U.S. and, frankly, its allies at this point who sat at that negotiating table, I wouldn't call Russia and China allies, it's partners. France and Britain and Germany are not credible anymore. When what gave Iran its bargaining power was precisely that we have seen Iran killing people in terrorist attacks around the world. We've seen them arming Hezbollah, which has launched wars against Israel, a war in 2006, which is threatening another one. We have seen them arming terrorist groups. We see that they are aggressive, determined, not apologetic about this, the same way we've seen that North Korea doesn't mind sinking a South Korean frigate, is happy to threaten seas of fire against democratic South Korea, that they're both happy to threaten the annihilation of the United States. What keeps this powerful, since these are, after all, really two-bit powers, apart from the nuclear weapons aspect of it, the terror networks that they're willing to use, is that their threats are credible. And what the Western powers have done here, this is like the worst of the 1930s, John, is sent the message that our threats really aren't credible, that our diplomats would rather do anything to appease the credible threateners than actually say, you don't do this, we will, in fact, hurt you. This is, John, one of the reasons that the Israelis are so upset about this is Israel has depended on credible threat of force for a long time. Israel doesn't launch aggressive wars against its neighbors, but it lives in a neighborhood full of powers that have done this against Israel and have been announcing, Iran in particular, their intention to annihilate the Israelis. That's why credible threat of force matters so much. And this has just been wiped off the table with this deal. The message the U.S. administration is sending is, we, on no account do we wish to use force. So that whole mighty U.S. nuclear arsenal, this immense power that we wield, gutted though it has been in recent years, becomes not useful in the calculus that we then bring to the bargaining table or the things that we say to other countries about stop doing the bad things that you're doing. This puts us in a terrible and dangerous position. It encourages aggression. It leads to the moment when finally something so terrible happens that the U.S. does have to use force to defend itself. And at that point, John, it will be a far more terrible war than if we had stopped it now.
Claudia,
that's the stage.
Claudia Rosett, journalist in residence, Foundation for the Defense of Democracies.